Now, if you were watching the Super Bowl, which I was not, I have to admit it, I actually kind of even forgot there was a Super Bowl. Not the biggest sports fan here. I actually watched Star Trek. But anyway, if you were watching the Super Bowl, you may have noticed a commercial that is getting a lot of heat online, stirred a little bit of controversy. Now, I'm not going to show you that commercial. Odds are, if you know what I'm talking about, you've already seen it. And if not, it's out there. You can go and watch it in all of its glory. But I will describe some of it. And then I'm going to break down the reason why it's causing some waves online. Now, according to the HuffPost, the minute-long ad features a clip of King's Drum Major Instinct as a sermon that was delivered about 50 years ago in 1968. Now, the audio apparently plays over shots of athletes training and soldiers and families and kids in the classroom. This is like a standard, ad. Now, it says, if you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who's the greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. So, okay. Now look, that's a recording of Dr. King. Now, just after the words, a new definition of greatness, you have this beautiful truck over here, right? That's riding through the mud, and it says, built to serve, Ram. Okay. Now, people were a little unhappy over this. In fact, I want to read a couple of tweets here. He says, this is author Michael Arsenault. Hopefully I got that name right. He said, so this means the King children allowed Dr. King's voice to be used to sell me a Dodge truck. Now, what's funny is that Bernice King, Martin Luther King's youngest daughter, replied to that tweet with one word, no. Now, writer and comedian Akilah Hughes tweeted, quote, black people can't kneel and play football, but MLK should be used to sell trucks during the Super Bowl. Unbelievable. Well, actually, incredibly believable because it actually happened. Now, actor John Cusack, I don't know how to say his name right. Cusack, whatever. Great guy, activist and all that. I just have difficulty saying his name correctly. So, hey, John, if you are watching, please instruct me the correct way to say your name. I would appreciate it. Now, he also tweeted, quote, MLK, who died striking with workers decrying militarism and imperial war makers, used to sell shiny trucks with marching soldiers. Corporate America, NBC, NFL should be ashamed. Well, I'll also add that, again, he's absolutely correct. Yes, they are using, and look, the NFL always uses militarism. It's one of the biggest, I guess, so-called patriotic games in America. Yes, it does use militarism to sell vehicles. And look, militarism is used to sell all sorts of things in America. That's just kind of right now what America is. Unfortunately, we are a military-obsessed society. So he's absolutely right on that. And of course, there are plenty of other reactions to this. A lot about how gross it is that MLK has basically been used as a tool of capitalism. Now, you want to know what Martin Luther King Jr. actually thought about capitalism? Got a few quotes here. He says, I imagine, and this was a letter to Coretta Scott King back in 1952. He said, I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. Capitalism started out with a noble and high motive, but like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. So that's in 1952. And as the years go by, he actually gets more radical. In 1967, for example, in a speech to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Georgia, he said, and one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? He's not just talking about African Americans, by the way. He's talking about everybody. Everyone who's in poverty, both white and black, Asian, all that stuff, right? Latino. Poverty is poverty, right? So he talks about these 40 million people who are in poverty. And he asks, and he says, when you begin to ask that question, you're raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. Uh-oh, he's talking about distribution of wealth. Conservative heads explode about this time. He said that when you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying the more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. Now, in that same speech, he also addresses capitalism. He says, capitalism forgets that life is social, and the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. So what does he mean? He's basically describing democratic socialism, where you take elements of, yes, a capitalist society and elements of a socialist society, and you combine them together into a system that has both, that has strong safety nets, but also allows for private investment, but also allows for things like worker co-ops and unions, and labor unions, to be able to advocate on behalf of the worker. So, yes, he's talking about democratic socialism, right? Now, in case you weren't clear that that's what he was talking about, right? He says, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. And this was in a speech to the Negro American Labor Council back in 1961. So, again, democratic socialism, that's what Bernie Sanders identifies as. Now, he would not be a right-winger, as a lot of Republicans love to claim. Oh, Martin Luther King Jr., he would have been a Republican. Are you out of your mind? Are you fucking mental? No, he wouldn't have been a Republican. He's saying right here, I'm a democratic socialist. I do not at all identify with the Republican, especially nowadays, Republicanism. Now, the only thing that maybe would be close is the fact that he would be a Christian leader. But again, there are Christian leaders on the left that are actually more like Jesus than Christian leaders on the right. These so-called people that are part of the moral majority, for example. And these are the people that are like, poverty, who cares? No, we got to fight against gay people's rights. And we also got to fight against abortion. Well, there you go. So that's what the right-wing Christians here in America believe. So this is a good example of left-wing Christianity, which, again, was not entirely perfect. I don't think that MLK was all that awesome on gay rights. So, but look, again, when you look at any figure through the historical lens, there are going to be things that, of course, are not so progressive. But on economic theory and on racial justice, MLK's your guy. Anyway, now, here's one more quote here. In a speech to a staff in 1966, he said that, quote, "We are saying something is wrong. With capitalism, there must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move towards a democratic socialism." So, that's pretty clear, right? He is a democratic socialist. Now, Chrysler, not democratic socialist. Chrysler is a capitalistic country, or company, sorry, in a very capitalistic country that just received gigantic tax cuts. Thanks to the Trump tax cuts, they're going to save billions of dollars, right? Now, that money doesn't trickle down to you. It goes right into the pockets of the shareholders. So the irony of Chrysler using quotes from MLK, who is a radical, a democratic socialist, all that stuff cannot be overstated. But it actually goes into the whitewashing of his legacy. They go through and they eliminate, they scrub all the radicalism away from Martin Luther King Jr., away from his legacy. And so they do that so they can appeal to, use him to appeal to white people, I guess. And they use it to sell this version to white people of an MLK who was more conservative, pro-free markets, capitalism, and somebody who loved the status quo, which he would definitely not be considered. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.